Hi, everyone. This is going to be a episode continuing after our initial question in the series was Tyler asked for proof of Jesus calling Paul out as false, and then I asked the question, does Jesus deliver in spades? And the evidence we provided was that Jesus in Matthew 5:17-19 actually calls Paul out by the meaning of his Latin name, and Tyler's response I'm going to show you here. We finally got it, and that's now going to be episode 3, and that I am entitling Answering Tyler's Reply, which dismisses translation of Paulos as the word least as deciphering names. Like that's something wrong. God would not ask us to do that. And then he had another rebuttal that Paul does not call himself least in Ephesians 3, verse 8. So we're going to take a look at these two, see what you think, and we're going to go to the next slide. Oh, yes. So we need to read Matthew 5:17-19 first. And this is Young's literal because I think it's a little clearer about what it means. What does the reign of the heavens in this have to do in verse 19? So we'll get to that in a minute. Verse 17, do not suppose that I came, Jesus speaking, to throw down the law or the prophets. That's the Torah law. And the words prophets means what follows. It's not talking about the writing section, incidentally, which were 3 sections. He's talking about those 2 are the key. I did not come to throw down, but to fulfill. Okay, so you don't abolish something when you fulfill it. You're satisfying its requirements for prophecy in particular. 18, for verily I say to you, till that heaven and earth may pass away, one iota or one tittle may not pass away from the law, till that all may come to pass. So not even the slightest small letter will fall from the law until the heavens and earth pass away. Anyway, verse 19, whoever therefore may loose one of these commands, the least, and may teach men so, least he shall be called in the reign of the heavens. Stop there. So the people who are in the reign of the heavens will call this person who is doing what? Person's teaching people not to follow the commandments of the law, okay, or the prophets. And that's known as apostasy. It's a crime in Deuteronomy 13:1-10 to turn people away from obeying God's law. If Jesus did that, he would be apostate. And Deuteronomy 13:1-10 would make him a false prophet, and Jesus could never be Messiah, and we would be all pursuing a false Christ. And so that's a totally different Christ than this speaking here. This Christ is reaffirming that, and that's why he's valid. He's not invalidated in apostate, but he's warning of somebody who's going to come who will be called by those who are in the reign of heavens the least. And now let's finish the end of the verse. But whoever may do and may teach them the commandments of the law and the prophets, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens. So there's no way of saying that Jesus means to intend to denigrate the law when he's saying that teaching it will make you be great in the kingdom of heaven. So that's how we know how he values it. Now, so Tyler is asking me, give me proof positive that Jesus calls out Paul by name, or somehow, we know for a fact he's false or whatever. And so he wanted it from Jesus. So I gave it to him, and he didn't like the response, which was, we're going to show you here. See here, this is Blue Letter Bible, and this is the word Paulos in Greek, and Paulos is Paul's name. It's it's right here. It's of Latin origin. So Paulos is not a Greek word. It is a Latin word, and that Latin word has a definition you can look up. If we go look at the dictionary, Holyoke Latin Dictionary 1677, and we look up the word poxolilis, we'll see it's a diminutive from poxolus. So, just to make it easier on everybody, there's a word called paucus, which means few. And then if you make a diminutive from that, that means you make it more of less, more of less, lesser. So what's less than few? Well, it'd be lesser is less than few. So you have few, then you have lesser. And then if you add a second diminutive, or in Latin we call it double diminutive, what's the second diminutive going to go from? So it's going to go from paucus, few, to this one diminutive. It'll be lesser. And then when you go to the second diminutive, you get least. So that's what poxolilis is. 2 diminutives at the end there. The ililis are 2 diminutives And that's just like we would have two superlatives for the word great. Great, and then a superlative, greater, and then another superlative, greatest. So you see how we do that? We have the same gradation going the other way in that particular example. So this is not uncommon. So you see, they even say, here's the dictionary definition of 1677, to the least that can be. That's the meaning of the word. All right. Then, if we want to look a little deeper here, and we go to a top-rate lexicon of the era of 1701, you can get it free of charge and download it. It's called Lexicon Philologicum, and see, it has a download button, so you can go take a look at it. Now, what's interesting, when you pull it up, you have to go to PDF page 207. So go to the PDF. Don't look at the pages at the top because they have a typo actually here. So they inverted the 149. It should have been 194. Anyway, regardless, then it has a dictionary definition, Paulus, and it has these meanings. And over here is Paulus, and it says ex hoc, which means an abbreviation. So Paulus is taken from ex hoc, the word either both poxolilis, which means lesser, I just said, or from the double diminutive word poxolilis, and that would be contracted into Paulus. So that's why we can say this is a translation issue, and that's going to be important because Tyler's response is, this is some sort of deciphering one must do. No, this is a translation issue. There is a Latin word in the Bible, and the word that is Latin is the word Paulos, of derivation, right? So go back here. It's of Latin origin. So Paulus is not Greek, it's Latin. So we actually are reading one, I'd say hundreds of, maybe 100 times, we're reading a Latin word. Do we know what that word means in Latin? It means least. Now, it doesn't always mean least. There are 5 other definitions. And so that's what's over here, non multum, non magnum, exilium, and so on. And then you also have poxilus with a single diminutive means lesser. So the only way somebody would know this was least is they have to have divine knowledge because the chance that you could figure this out, what's on Paul's birth certificate? He was born a Roman citizen. Remember that? He's a Roman citizen from birth. So that means he has to have a Latin name on that birth certificate. You can't put a Hebrew bunch of letters that say, Shaul. You got to put down in Latin letters, Poxolilis. And then that means my son is named least. And that was, by the way, a cute thing. People called their children's lesser or least. It's just, but that's who Paul is. That's it. So and how do we know that? Well, anyway, it came from Augustine saying, I heard him say, I'm the least of the apostles in 1 Corinthians 9:2. And it just dawned on me, his name is Paulus. And he says that means minimus. And that's how we know minimus is a synonym for poxolilis. And that's how we know what Augustine could recognize as a Latin speaker. But we, not being familiar with Latin words, we don't know how Paulus translates directly into the Latin word poxolilis, and is abbreviated Paulus with a US. And when it got transliterated into Greek, they rounded out to Paulos. That's the only change. Okay, so here's the question of Tyler. So you don't think God is powerful enough to give us his word complete without having to decipher names and what to leave out? So he's saying that this another strange stance. So he's thinking translation from Latin to English is a strange stance. Do you see the point he's making? You don't think God would give us Jesus' words only if that was all that was what he wanted us to have? So he's trying to say that, well, that's another argument we can get into another time. But so he's saying that just the mere presence of Paul's words in the quote Bible means that God intended us to accept it instead of test it. So we can see here the answer is this very thing. The testing of Paul is by doing what we're doing, which is, why is Jesus calling out somebody named least who's an apostate in Matthew 5:17-19, who actually proves to be an apostate, which is a whole nother problem. How does Tyler explain how Paul doesn't violate Deuteronomy 13:1-10? Someone who turns anybody away from the law of Moses is considered apostate, is guilty of a capital crime and must be put to death. That's how serious God takes it. And when you get rid of God's law, you've created a different God, because that's a God who doesn't have his own law anymore. So it's just very obvious. But just I'm answering his point about it's a strange stance that God would require us to decipher a name. It's not deciphering, it's translating. And if you didn't know it, all of the Bible in English was originally written in a different language. It was written in Greek, so all translated. So by his viewpoint, every time we translate every word in the Bible is a strange stance. So he somehow must think the Bible's in English. I'm kind of being mocking here because obviously he doesn't believe that. But what he doesn't realize is he's actually saying it's strange to translate a Latin term. That's all we're taking, the Latin word polos, and we're translating it into English, which is the word least. But does he not realize it's just a translation issue? He's calling it a strange stance that God would require us to, quote, decipher a word. Yes. So I just say this. I can mock him if he's actually saying and understands that he's saying it's wrong, Doug, that God would ever make it that we have to translate a word to understand its meaning. I'm sorry. It deserves mockery because every word in the English New Testament is a translation, not just Paulos. So what is his name? And just to show you, you know how Indian names stand for something else. And so if you Pocahontas means something else, and all these words mean other things, and they can be translated. Some of them would be, big bear, little bear, and all these other words. So the Indian name doesn't say little bear, big bear, because they didn't speak English. They're translating it for us so we can understand what their words mean in Indian. So just to show you, if we were to transliterate every time we see Paul's name, just to show you what could and should happen based on Augustine's assistance, we would then say, okay, every time we see the word Paulos, why don't we just change it every single time and we just put down the translation of his name as least? That would maybe help us. I want to illustrate that point by something that lets us stand back because it sounds controversial to translate Paul's name as least. Let's just go look at the word Lucas. That's Luke's name, right? And it's another word of Latin origin. And it's from the verb lucere, to shine, from which the English name Luke comes. So it means shiny one or light bearer or whatever. So why don't we just do exactly what the Indians do and transliterate names from what they are into English? So I think this should be done throughout the Bible. So Yeshua's name is actually Yahweh saves, or some people say it's salvation of Yahweh. Why don't every time we say the name of Yeshua, we actually just change it into English? The salvation of Yah says this. Okay, because that's what actually it is saying in the text, and we are not actually translating it to an English speaking audience, the meaning of these names. So why do we do that? Maybe we should start doing that. And so every time we talk about Luke, we should say the light bearer or the shiny one says this about Paul. So and it says this about the least. I should now let's translate Paul's name in there. So he would now become the least, and Luke would be the shiny one, and Jesus would be called the salvation of Yah. Do you see the point? So we are inadequately translating the Bible when we don't convey the name. So I would actually say to bow to conventionality, put in brackets every time Luca's name, put in brackets shiny one. Every time Paul's name is there, put in brackets the least. And that way we would understand the meaning of the names. And then same with Jesus. It would say, Yeshua or Jesus, and then have a bracket, salvation of Yah. See? And that would help us. Also, we would now learn the name of God is not Lord, it's Yah or Yahweh, which is Yah Almighty. Way is amplification. All right, so I digressed enough on that. All right, so let's go to his second issue. Here it is. Again, Paul did not say he was least. He said, unto me, who am less than the least of all saints, is this grace given that I should preach among the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ. Ephesians 3, verses 8. Now, I'm going to be a little tough on him here. He's obviously not watched this video. So it's just sad. He ends up looking up the word least, obviously, in a concordance, and this is what he came up with. And he didn't do a thorough search. So I do want to, say something about that to him. Hi, Tyler. Did you watch the video? The verse that Augustine relied upon to say Paul called himself least was 1 Corinthians 9, verse 2, not Ephesians 3, verse 8. In 1 Corinthians 9, verse 2, this is what was in my video, so now I have to explain it to him because he didn't watch it, obviously. Paul calls himself least of the apostles. Augustine 2 times says Paul was playing on the Latin meaning of his name in this passage by calling himself minimus. in English, this translates to least. So Augustine didn't actually tell us. He's writing to Latin speakers, so they know what he's talking about is Pauxilius or Paulus, and so he just simply says Paul is playing on the meaning of his name, which means minimus, which in Latin is the synonym for Pauxilius, and it means minimus. Minimus in Latin means least. So that means we don't actually see the word that Augustine is talking about. So kind of like just died there. And then in 1885, Farrar sees these two comments in Augustine, and he records them, and then he does a book, and then he just puts a small footnote, probably a throwaway fact that he learned that he thought was interesting, so he just included it. Farrar, who was the canon to the queen, meaning the priest confessor for her, in 1885 deduced what Augustine meant. For if you look up Paulus, Paul's Latin name rendered Paulos in Greek, in a Latin dictionary, Farrar saw it is a contraction of another word. The word, in fact, is Pauxilius, which means least. Pauxilius is derived from the word, this is what I'm writing him, so I want to finish the whole letter. Pauxilius is derived from the word paucus, few, with a double diminutive, illus, and it's spelled Pauxilius. Hence, a double diminutive is the superlative of the word, like we say great, greater, greatest, the latter being two superlatives higher from great. So Augustine, being a native Latin speaker, recognized Paul saying he was least of the apostles was playing on one of the 6 meanings of Paulos in Latin as least. As a Roman citizen, Paul's Roman name on his birth certificate had to be Pauxilius, not merely Paulus. And I said, therefore, Ephesians 3:8 is irrelevant to the discussions. It has no bearing. So what he called himself lesser than the least another time. It has no bearing on the fact that he's confessing his name. He's making actually a pun of his own name. I'm called least of the apostles. I am the least of the apostles. So it's just a pun play on his own name, maybe an inside joke with himself. He knows what he means. And that's what Augustine sensed. And that's how we know his true meaning of his name. So anyway, I think that's the end of our episode here. Let me see. No, yes, I think we're done. Okay, so everybody, I hope that gives you answers. If you yourself had similar thoughts, that's what happens when people give me comments. It may reflect something that you might be thinking and asking a question. And so by answering them in this format, I can give an answer to a lot of people's possible comments. They don't have to make them. You can just read or watch this video, and you can have the discussion in your own just sitting here looking at the arguments, pro and con. All right. God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.